Welcome to the Mystical Mermaid Lounge podcast, a space where all spiritual seekers are honored and celebrated. This podcast was born from the journeys of your hosts, who have each faced her own dark night of the soul, but they've emerged with an unshakable belief in divine connection, cosmic inspiration, and her true life's calling. Join us on a journey of personal growth, transformation, and magical self-discovery. Your first co-host is Chloe Brown, a gifted intuitive empath and shadow work life coach. Your second co-host is Keone Starr, an intuitive energy worker and acclaimed past life regressionist. The Mystical Mermaid Lounge podcast starts now. Welcome. I am Keone. Megan Plummer is our guest. She is a psychic medium, paranormal investigator, poet, and painter. She is an energy healer and mentors students on their spiritual journey, and she has been instrumental in my spiritual journey and a very welcome addition to my life.
Oh, thank you for having me.
And Chloe is here with us as well.
Welcome, Megan. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited. I hear about you all the time. So many wonderful things.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm a fangirl. I admit it. One of the reasons we wanted to have you on our podcast, Megan, is because you have a long history with paranormal investigation. Mm-hmm. So what is your definition of paranormal and what an investigator does?
Mm-hmm. For paranormal, I'd say it's any kind of spiritual activity. It tends to have a higher connotation with the ghosts and the paranormal investigation and or spooky things, but I was realizing and wanted to start emphasizing and redirecting for the paranormal to also include general spiritual experiences, because that is something kind of beyond normal, and it's still interaction with the spirit realm. But I notice it tends to really lock in on the quote unquote like darker or like spookier kind of vibes.
Right.
And that's what you see represented a lot in film and those shows. And I get it, they like the drama. So I feel like the positive or empowering just don't get as much of a voice. That was my goal, was to kind of bridge that gap between the two perspectives, to realize that it's all really one thing. It's just what you choose to prioritize interacting with.
What convinced you to pursue investigation?
My main intention when I first started actually wanting to lean into or like understand my own intuitive abilities, and that was the best place to sort of practice feeling and understanding energies. So I always took a very investigative approach no matter what, because it was just built on that curiosity. I had my own sensitivities to energies, a lot of dream stuff, watched a lot of the shows when I was younger. So it was just a place to kind of explore that curiosity and try to get an understanding of what things are, how and why they feel, how they feel. And in the group environment of a team, I guess I felt safer kind of exploring that and being aware of it. But I'll also say in that investigation experience, sometimes I realized I would feel the live people that I'm with in the group almost as much or more sometimes than the paranormal activity actually in the building, especially if people had a lot of anxiety or other things going on. So there's different layers to it. But yeah, it was just like a general curiosity of understanding the spirit world, and my intuition led me to be like, let's just feel it out myself. So it started there. Then I eventually ended up on the more spiritual path, and through like the energy work and eventually like the shamanic work, though I then gained the other side of the perspective spiritually and grew my abilities in that way. And then it kind of looped back around to bridge that gap.
How do you discern between the energies you're feeling, between the people that are there with you in the investigation versus energy you're feeling from those you can't necessarily see?
Because especially if we weren't getting a lot of evidence, I would kind of know it was the people and or, an example of feeling the anxiety and knowing it wasn't me or the space. The person next to me might be really tapping their leg, or the people. I could also see physical signs were restless. So that's kind of what helped me realize this is more them than the space. And I don't typically necessarily get anxiety from spirit as one of their feelings.
I think anxiety is a very human
Yeah.
experience.
Hmm.
First, I want to say thank you for explaining the paranormal from your perspective. And I love that you're trying to bring light to the side of it that is not, maybe not so mainstream.
Everything is ultimately energy, even if you think about the fact that everything is literally just made up of different molecules with electrons and neutrons, protons, etc. So, like, if you think about the fact that everything is ultimately just energy, that's why I kind of put everything under paranormal, and I started taking that more energy work perspective into the observation and really taking out the polarity of good and bad and just realizing that it's just the way energy is and or is responding or collecting in a space. It can manifest however you're open to it as well. So it's like you don't even have to be a specific religion or a religious person. And one of the theories and curiosities that I had was that you can have spiritual experiences with beings that are in alignment with what you believe if you have a specific path that you follow, whether it's religion or spiritual or whatever, because that's how you understand spirit. And I see it all as like a manifestation of energy. So even if it's what would be called like an egregore, which is when it's people's emotions or places energy that kind of ends up collecting in an area, it can manifest sort of into a being or like into like a feeling when you go into a room. And actually, I think even in our own podcast, Cosmic Theater Mystery School, we talked about it is also like our own shadows, like our own metaphorical demons sometimes, especially if it's in a space that we have a lot of strife or struggle, or there has been a lot of struggle, because you can pick up on all those layers in a location, whether it's the land, the present community, if it's kind of something from the past, if it all kind of exists at once, because we only really perceive things as linear. If you have a projected fear or feeling or tension, that's going to be what reflects, or that's also going to be the lens that you're looking through. And especially because so many of the investigations specifically go to places with negative experiences or murder and death. Well, that's what you're kind of looking for. So that's kind of what's the layer that's there, but it's not saying it's the only thing there. Because I've also been places that might have had that experience, but it's not the only thing there, or people have had spooky experiences, but like I didn't necessarily have that experience there. And I don't think that other people's experiences are incorrect, but I think it's kind of same thing when we talk about like your own personal vibration. It's what, quote unquote, resonates with you. Like what phone line or frequency are you tapping into? So if you're tuned into this aspect, that's going to be more of what reveals it to you. And one of the stories that had given me the greatest awareness and perspective on that was when I was a guest with another team, and the one group was very antagonistic and just different. And they were specifically looking for, I think it was like the goat man or whatever had helped them kind of kick off their own business or group situation that they had. I think they eventually ended up having like their own mini series. That being said, so they were antagonizing and doing that. And then I was with their medium and then another friend of mine. And we didn't have any equipment, which I think is interesting as far as like the difference. And I had also specifically brought offerings to the space. And then I also had like some clearing stuff as well for afterwards if I felt like I needed it. But we went down this one path off the road that we were on into the woods. I think I had done a little bit of an offering. I think I brought like rose petals or something first. And we had more like native or like elemental beings kind of like come forward. And it made me think about the litter on the ground, the graffiti on the ground, people coming and antagonizing or using that spot to mess around with energy. I offered the rose petals in that particular example, and then we had this conversation, and I think I'd even sang to them a little bit, and it was just really cool. And what was interesting was that really positive experience contrasting when we switched spots. So then the other team came in a little bit further down the path, but on the same path, and we were asking questions around the corner. They were doing the Estes method, which is when you have headphones in and like a blindfold on so you don't have any of your other senses in. So it's just coming through the spirit box, which cycles through different radio stations basically, but it's mostly white noise to be able to pull through words and or enhance your own intuition. So those guys were doing that, the one that had been antagonizing, and then me and the other people were asking the questions around the corner. And it was kind of playful at first, like we were just joking around on our end because the walkie was acting weird and some of the words that were coming through, like the energy just like really shifted with what we were asking and like the words that were coming through, and eventually like our walkie turned off, the one inside the closed case turned on. So then we're like scrambling for the other walkie. The words that the person was getting out over in the same spot we had been just didn't feel right, and they were definitely more negative. I don't remember now what it was, but I got nervous only once the medium got nervous. She was like, we need to stop it, like something's wrong. So we put the walkie away and we go over to them like down the road a bit, and we're like, pull him out, something isn't right. And he had even gotten, scarier words or messages that he didn't share while he was under. And why I think it was interesting was because we both were in the same or similar location, like within 100 feet, a few yards, whatever. Like, it wasn't that the actual location was different, but that's what really demonstrated to me Spirit's reflection of what you bring into it and what you're looking for. Because we had a perfectly fine and positive experience. They had the equipment and they were doing like Facebook live stream or something like that. I think that's why they got that experience, is because they were looking for that. And I feel like Spirit will put on a show if you want them to. Because again, it doesn't matter to them. And even the medium kind of felt like the ones we had interacted with were there, but weren't going to intervene. And the message that we were kind of getting was like, well, this is what they asked for. So they weren't going to intervene with that. We had a totally different positive experience, didn't feel threatened in any way. I was really thankful to have that experience because that really was the major shift in my perspective of how the paranormal has helped me also understand, like when we think about manifestation or how we create our reality, like how energy literally reflects what we bring, our intention, our expectation, etc.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite stories to tell just because it does give a very direct example about how it doesn't have to be that kind of bad, quote unquote, experience. That's not what you're looking for because all the spaces I think are just kind of open to it, especially the ones that are haunted. I feel like there's just like an energy and activity for that space to be there. But how you use it, how you use any energy is really up to you. And the best example of showing how important it is to go in a good way. And it's not the first place that I had gotten a message from Spirit about respect. I had also gotten it in Gettysburg and Salem. People also do a lot of paranormal investigation in both of those spaces. So there was 3 different times that I had spirits talking about respect specifically, or like lack of respect, not realizing that these are real experiences from the past, real land with real trauma that affected other people, whether it's those spirits specifically. I think there's an importance to honoring the land and like the experience of that area rather than going in purely with more of like that ego desire for a certain outcome instead of being receptive to the story that actually wants to be told, if that makes sense.
100% sense.
One of the things that you mentioned, Megan, that had me thinking about my own experience, for instance, the egregore and the build-up of energy. My own experience has been when I'm doing past life regressions, often the energy that is, I don't know if it's created or maybe pulled together, wreaks havoc with my technology. My smartphone starts acting crazy. It played a Netflix show one time when I was interviewing my client prior to doing the regression. Then she, as an example, said, "Oh, I'm going to go silence my phone. Now that I hear your phone going off, let me silence my phone so no calls come through." She silenced her phone and a call came through. So when she picked up the phone to listen to the voicemail, it was her daughter saying, "Mom, I'm not sure if you're actually getting this message. The phone never really rang and all I hear is static. Just give me a call when you have a chance. No big deal."
Mm-hmm.
So she lets me listen to this voicemail and I'm thinking, okay. This is crazy. So, with those types of things that I have experienced just most recently, in just doing a past life regression with people who are clearly interested in tapping into different energies, do all energies have the ability to pull energy from things or impact technology? Because I believe on your podcast with Cosmic Theater Mystery School, I remember you folks talking about how Elise, I believe, saw Indians just walking through her room,
Hmm.
but they weren't conscious. So, would
Hmm.
they impact technology, or what different types of energies have you found?
Hmm. I have two ways to answer it. In that, I think technology can be affected just because of the energy shift of the space, but I feel like it would take a more intelligent entity to consciously, on their end, use the technology to interact. Whereas, like, it exists in a space, I don't necessarily feel that it would be using it, but it could affect it. If there's that energy shift in you or in the space for whatever reason, that's where we'll kind of see the fluctuations. Like you see the EMF meters, the electromagnetic frequency meters on the shows. You can get spikes and drops as the energy is changing. And that's where depleted batteries too will sometimes happen on investigations. And those, especially the batteries or things draining energy, or if you feel like the temperature changed, that's where I would feel like there's a entity or energy that's actually drawing from it to have the energy to interact. But if something's more like residual, like which is what Elise was experiencing more, where it was just kind of like that energetic imprint in a space, you could still see an effect on technology, but I don't believe that they would be using it intentionally.
Are you saying essentially you feel like there is multiple layers, like the imprinted version of what Elise's experience is,
Hmm.
and how the energy or technology could absolutely interact, but maybe not an intelligent interaction. It's more just a, hey, we're all here together, whereas a more intelligent spirit are just that and more able to intelligently interact and
Hmm.
deliver specific versus just revealing the veil, or if time isn't linear, just letting you see perhaps another.
Hmm.
Okay.
It leads me to the poltergeist phenomena where, and you alluded to it, well, actually, both of you, where you have this energy, specifically teenagers, is what I'm thinking,
Hmm.
that are obviously going through a lot of emotional growth, spiritual growth, physical growth. And it isn't necessarily an easy time. And a lot of poltergeist activity, I have heard anyway, seems to happen around those types of households.
Hmm.
And that is energy being raised from their angst. Is that intelligent in any way?
For poltergeist activity, and this is one that I fortunately haven't had personal experience with, but I've heard a lot of examples, and I think what's more relevant for the poltergeist activity is I'm not at this point entirely sure that they are their own other intelligent being. Rather, my curiosity is if again it's like a manifestation of that more chaotic energy. And it really reminds me how during times of transition, spirit and energy is louder. So when there is a lot of energy and emotion or shifting in your world, whether it's a personal life change with a lot of emotion or you're physically moving, there's something about that like kind of in between space where I feel like that energy can really just get a little louder. So that's my curiosity around it specifically. My curiosity is less that it's another being that came to them or if it's really their own energy manifesting externally. Because, like I said, I started to treat everything kind of like energy work. And when somebody has things happening, I also like to ask, well, what were you going through when this started? Because they don't realize the energy is also often reflective of the people or the situations kind of going on at the time. It's not to say that's always the case, but a lot of times it is. And I realize that working with the people themselves can help shift the energy that's around them. If that's the energy that you're emanating, or if it's something that's not being expressed and like your internal world is really chaotic, so you still kind of have that sort of frequency or whatever, it's kind of going around chaotically, like unconscious, because you're not directing the energy, it's just existing. And that's why, like I said, certain spaces, especially when there is a lot of energy or anger or frustration, and it can be the opposite too, like when you walk into a room that feels really good or happy in those ways, but we don't notice that because we just notice it feels good. There's like a lot of luck and ease in a certain space. Like we don't pay attention to the fact that that is also a reflection of the people and the energy and the emotions in that space or that container. We obviously notice the more like chaotic or spooky ones, which is fair because we're programmed mentally as beings, like human animal beings, to be aware of threats. So I think that's why our attention is drawn more to things that are spooky. But I think it's often a reflection of the internal chaos also. And that's not to say that there couldn't be an external force of some sort that maybe instigates and feeds off that energy. Like I said, I'm fortunate that I haven't had a lot of those experiences, but I have heard them. And if they have that and they're trying to instigate more of that fear or chaos, it kind of quote unquote like feeds that being, but I'll also say it feeds that reality is actually the word that I wanted to say. And that's where I was again realizing that my curiosity around the manifestation aspect in our own worlds overlapping with the paranormal experience.
I often wonder if a lot of it plays into the veil that we talk about as children grow
Mm-hmm.
older, how that kind of gets a little thicker as we get older.
Mm,
And then I also wonder, in addition to that layer, what if that individual is, because I personally believe that we all have the capability of being psychic. So with that in
absolutely.
mind,
Yep.
with that in mind, I believe maybe they're a bit more dialed into it for one
Mm,
reason or another, whether they're cognizant or aware of it at that time. And I often play with those thoughts and think about that. How much, if any, does that all play a role in poltergeist experience? And for
mm-hmm.
me, I often wonder if that is a very different section per se, or really not necessarily like a whole new intelligent entity. I just think they're so different
Mm-hmm.
personally. So I love that you spoke to that.
Yeah, and I actually really like that point that you brought up as well, especially if we focus our curiosity around the younger people, like especially like teenagers, because that is when fighting with, I mean, really like your perspective of reality. And like you said, then there is that point where in our younger lives, we are typically more open. And then there is a point where you kind of just get more entrenched in the quote unquote real world. We stop being as imaginative, playing games and like being really connected to that creative spirit. So that does make me curious if some of that chaos is that dissonance or that internal fight between being open to it and not. And I think that there is an element of chaos that can happen when spirit is trying to get your attention. And now, like, that kind of makes me curious how many of those situations are really intended to be scary or negative, or if it's just trying to bring awareness and change, but then it just kind of invokes fear rather than us being in our power of, okay, what's happening and why. And I think that's a big, important point as well is if we're kind of just shifting into the fear of the change or the fear of feeling another presence in our minds, especially subconscious survival minds, anything that's, quote unquote, other is perceived as a threat. Kind of the same with change. So again, in those times of change and we're like feeling those fear because it's the unknown. Kind of same with the paranormal, it's
Exactly.
the unknown. So are you kind of coming in with fear or again, and this is like a lot of what I end up teaching in like the mentorship and like when I talk about different intuitive things, that's why like having yourself like really anchored in your center and really knowing your energy and then being an observer first is really the most powerful place to be, especially because if it's not specifically hurting you, it's just like weird stuff that's happening around you. I really think it's just trying to call attention to something that's not being listened to in, maybe even our internal worlds. Therefore, it's being projected externally. And it can be in spirit, but like the other part I really want to emphasize is, we talk about the spirit reflection and the chaos that can come out, but what are we seeing reflected in our actual relationships, our actual work environment? Because I don't think it's all really that separate. So if you're attracting a certain amount of people or drama or like other external things, either direction, whether it's positive and helpful and like, right place, right timing, or whether it's more drama oriented and like antagonizing or fearful, like that becomes a very different experience. And I think it's really, again, reflective of the internal world as well when we see
Yeah.
it. And it's not always external or fearful, but yeah, there's just different ways that your subconscious is always trying to interact with you is
Yeah.
really what I'm seeing more, whether it's through spirit, through energy, or through the people that are reflecting your energy, if you think about the way that we're ultimately reflecting each other in all these ways.
Yeah. Hearing you talk about that really makes me wonder about how much poltergeist could just be our own shadows.
Yeah, I think it's just a really important perspective to look internally as well, because it is more us. And like I said, that's been kind of the beauty of my experience, is learning that the world is really reflecting us, and that like our mindsets and the energy that we have really does affect us. Because obviously I was familiar with a lot of the concepts, but that's where the paranormal perspective really like intersected and helped me understand the spiritual perspectives as far as manifestation and creating our realities, that other side of things.
So, we've talked a little bit about the experience you had when a small group of you were raising energy and discerning the energies that had come to you, while another group was trying to get in touch with the goat man. And I know the underlying concept there is you're wanting to conduct an ethical investigation. Can you speak to your definition of what an ethical investigation is? Because you've spoken to offerings and those types of things, and then why you think that's important.
I would consider an ethical investigation, I mean, a mixture of like obviously not faking evidence, like that's kind of the beginning part, not saying how often that happens, but I mean, it can happen. But again, I think it really just goes back to the respect at part of it, and that the message that I was getting. And when we think of other cultures in the past and the fact that connecting to spirit was respected, and it was a ceremony, and it was an intentional connection to spirit and the divine, and an honoring of the space. And if you think about these energies or beings as how you relate to anything, like relating to other people, it's like, are you barging into someone's house? Because that's kind of what it could seem like if you're not introducing yourself, if you're not showing respect for the space. It's like you're coming into their space, which is why I think it's important to do it with openness, kind of like you would with any relationship, as far as just being receptive and respectful. And I mean, that's really the baseline of it, besides specifically, maybe even telling them why they're here, or maybe sharing your name, or like I said, your intention. And the offering is like, again, the offering's really just like that exchange of energy. So it's like you're not looking to just take something from them or to get something specifically from them or to use the energy for the shows. And it's like, is it for personal gain? Is it for a genuine desire for connection? And I think that's the biggest difference I kind of see and share in that, which is why just the symbolic energy of offering, whether it's like tobacco to the land, or I'll use mugwort, or like the rose petals. And sometimes I just kind of pick intuitively what the land or the space, quote unquote, wants. And I'll use that, or sometimes I just kind of have random things like on hand. And yeah, I mean, it's just mutually like a sign of respect. It's like if you go up to a stranger and then you're asking them for a favor, you know?
Right. So you just treat them like a friendship, like you would your friends or your family, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's the best way to go about it. And I think that's part of what creates such a different experience.
I totally agree with that. And I love that you said that we are essentially experiencing a reflection of what we're putting out there. So if we come into someone's house and demand, I want to know X, Y, or Z, then of course the response we're going to get isn't going to be in a gentle way. It may be like, what in the world are you doing in my house? And secondarily, I didn't give you permission to ask questions. I totally get that. And I often wonder if places like Gettysburg, because I grew up in the town right beside Gettysburg. So I spent a lot of teenage years now reflecting back, disrespecting Gettysburg because I lived there. It wasn't a sacred land to me as a teenager. It was where kids went to drink. It was where they went to party, to hang out, to write their names on things that shouldn't be written on. It pains me to think that I behaved that way, but I also remember getting that feeling of the just the otherness in Gettysburg. I mean, as soon as you enter into specific perimeter, it starts right outside the town. You kind of know you're there.
Hmm.
It's just a whole other feeling. And I wish I would have treated that better, but it makes me wonder for so many investigators or people who just misuse the place if it doesn't then set a precedent for the next person who wants to come and investigate. Do you have to
Hmm.
try harder to make it clear that you're there for good?
Hmm. Well, that's where I think even just coming in with the offering and respect, that immediately shows that it's different than just unconsciously or, without intention, just going and hanging out. And especially those places, and Elise is a great person to listen to on any of her podcasts with, just because she specifically works with the land and has her own practice like Sacred Wild and whatnot, because there is a different energy to land, and I think part of it is affected by what happened there. So again, if we think about how everything is ultimately energy, and I started to realize the land and spaces are very similar. So when there's like a trauma or something on the land, like it just has its own energy or power that's kind of being given to it in a different way. So I think that's part of like why you feel that shift in that area. And it makes it, especially because there was so much death there, like that's an example of like I said, I'm not sure that portal is the best word, but I don't know, word rather, but maybe like the veil might be thinner there. So it's more open to the potential for connection, but how you choose to use it or not is really up to you. So I don't necessarily think that you have to try harder, though, I could maybe say that there's been an experience or two with spirits that are just like more assertive or kind of closed off, like I don't want to be bothered. Because you will kind of get that vibe too sometimes where they're like, I don't really want to interact. And it's kind of like, again, with a person, it's like, are you going to keep nagging them or are you going to be like, okay, I'm going to respect your space and we're going to not interrogate you?
As a child, I had this feeling that we were all being filmed. And I used to tell my mom, can't we just turn the cameras off for a little bit? We need a break. But that feeling really was strong for me, even as a kid. As soon as we entered that, like I said, that property line, whatever that thing is, that liminal
Mhm.
space is into Gettysburg, I felt excited and like things were magical, and that's where we always wanted to go.
Hmm.
So
Wow.
yeah, as a kid, I really enjoyed it. And then as a teenager, of course, those types of things go out the window for a while.
It's just part
Wow.
of the process.
A lot of things went out the window for a while.
Part of growing up for sure, but I definitely want to go there. I am in the Pacific Northwest, so I have not yet made it out there to do all of those fun things. But I said yet.
Hmm. And actually, the energy can change in places too. And I can't remember offhand what episode it was, but I think Elise spoke to the fact that the energy in Gettysburg for her and her experience has kind of shifted because again, it's sort of what's loudest there at the time. So as time passes, that energy can change because again, it's what's being fed there. If you are continuing to feed a belief or a story or to honor those spirits, they're going to have that energy or like that quality. So I thought that was a really cool perspective for her, where she feels like, it'll always be an active location just because of the land itself, but that what imprint you pick up on most can change in an area based on who and what's there. And again, that's kind of sort of egregore, like that collected energy based on the people and the experiences. And that's where I was like also talking about the different layers of things, like which one's the loudest and which one's kind of faint or like more in the past or, just overshadowed because of the intensity of
Right.
certain emotions being louder, or experiences than others. So I'm curious how that will go as well.
That makes me think of New Orleans a little bit, actually, because since I was probably, gosh, 4 or 5, I don't know how, but I've always been obsessed. And I always just thought maybe it was history, even though I absolutely failed all my history classes. So I'm not sure
Mhm.
how that works. And then when I was in the military, we actually were called out for Hurricane Katrina relief, even though I was overseas. So a lot could be said to what you just said, actually, just the layers upon layers. And sometimes it just needs, that emotional reprieve from this moment. And it's like little air pockets, just like with
Mhm.
humans, since we don't allow ourselves to properly grieve. So we just kind of push it down and then it just kind of pops back up in these little shadow bubbles,
Mhm.
and I feel like that is exactly what I'm hearing you say with the land as well. And I definitely heard you guys on that episode talk about that.
Well, and actually, something that you just shared made me remember something I read recently as well. I forget if it was the book I just did an interview with somebody in or not. So you were talking about Hurricane Katrina and then like the original energy, especially like around New Orleans and that area. There was a perspective in the more recent times where like those storms, whether it's hurricanes or thunderstorms, how they're also an energy cleanse. Kind of makes me curious. There's actual weather patterns. I mean, it literally clears people and things out of the area. So I don't know. It kind of makes me curious of the potential relationship between those things or what happens in certain areas when the wind really picks up a lot. We got climate change. I don't know. I just think it's interesting, like noticing, and even within yourself, if there's a lot going on or transition in your personal life and there's just really crazy wind lately. And I only notice it because the wind really agitates me. But what I kept thinking in my head was like winds of change. It's on a personal level, but then also sometimes like a collective level, or if you're feeling like a really heightened or heavy emotion and then maybe it rains or there's a big storm, sometimes I wonder if that's just like another way that energy moves or releases. Because again, if we think about everything really being significantly more connected, I'm not sure that it's really all that different. Like, I reflect on some of the correlations with it. I just think it's interesting. Yeah, with like Louisiana and New Orleans and Katrina specifically, really any of the big storms, it offers kind of a clearing of the actual space and change. And I mean, it also shifts the people because then you're bringing in people and energy that are more, I'll go ahead and use like the quote unquote like positive kind of caretaking. It literally ends up bringing a different energy into the space because it kind of clears out whatever, and then there's something different that kind of comes in to rebuild it literally and metaphorically, which I think is interesting.
Makes me think of wildfires.
Hmm.
Makes me think of Mother Earth having
Hmm.
her cleanse cry.
Hmm.
I'm very Pisces, so I speak emotional. And
Hmm.
let's just say I work on being less emotional and speaking my truth. But that's what it makes me think of is she needed that flush.
Yeah.
When we went to Havre de Grace and we did the ghost hunting in the park area beside the lock in the canal,
Hmm.
I felt so sad. I just had this video clips running in my mind of young Black children pushing these mules and these barges along the canal, and it felt so just so horrible. And yet other people picked up on different things that didn't necessarily feel that bad, but I think it was because of where specifically my sister and I were walking, specifically along the canal.
Hmm.
And my sister had picked up on some similar things in addition to, I think, visions of females in certain types of period attire. And then we had ended up talking about that as well. But during that specific ghost walk, you had a number of tools and instruments that you had handed out to us to use. And you spoke to the Estes method. But what other tools do you use? You spoke to, is the spirit box the same thing or is that different? And which do you find of all the tools to be the most reliable, or is it a user issue?
The spirit box is also used for the Estes method. The only difference is that you have it in headphones so that you can't hear the question being asked. So that's just like one of the more investigative ways. Like if you're trying to get like historical, like factual information, that's more useful if you want the non-biased answer. Or I mean, even if you're asking a question for somebody or any spirit. The point is like that just kind of offers an opportunity for non-biased responses because it's not being influenced by the question that's being asked. Or you can have it without the headphones, the spirit box by itself, and you can hear it and kind of have it more like open conversation style. I did mention the EMF meter, the electromagnetic fields, because again, if they manipulate energy, then you can kind of see spikes or drops, and or you can kind of do like base readings, which are when you go around a house or a place to see if there's any natural or unnatural, if it's like electrical, like spikes or drops, because really high EMF not only can it increase spirit activity just because of the energy, but it can also give you physical symptoms that you might think is spirit, but because the EMF is just really high. So I've been on one where it's just the same spot that they kept seeing spirit or like feeling weird energy was also where their electrical box was. I think I had brought the dowsing rods, which are really good for just yes, no questions, kind of whether they go apart is a no or cross is a yes. And that and the pendulum too. And they're hard because there's the realistic part is that it's a human holding it. So investigative wise, it can be tricky just because people will say, how do you know that you're not affecting it? And the answer is you are, but it's more of a subconscious or like intuitive yes or no, but it's just like, again, an external tool. We can use cameras, whether they're video cameras. You can get ones with, night vision or infrared, which can capture different energies or images or stuff that's not visible to the naked eye, but then you kind of catch it later. And that's the same with just a typical voice recorder. You might not hear it with our ears, but when you listen back, you might hear a little something. So they just offer different ways for you to perceive it. And a lot of those are more important, like if you're looking to capture specific evidence, whereas sometimes I don't mind about that. And I've always had a really intuitive approach or been with a couple groups that really did lean on that. And then like you can have the equipment to confirm that as well, which is neat. And then they have a bunch of other fancy tools as well. The SLS thing, which I think can, again, like pick up if there's a being there, it kind of comes up as like a little stick figure. Some of the shows have that. Some of the tools are expensive. They're not necessary to have a good investigation, but I do love the fact that so many of them are made by ghost hunters themselves. They're just different ways to perceive energy, and they're also like not always that technically complicated as far as sweeping radio stations or frequencies or having like a word bank to be pulled. So it's really what works best for you, because even in one of my groups, and personally, one of the most effective ones, or one of the ones that was used the most often that we got a lot of response with in a couple locations, was the flashlight, like the one you twist the mag light so it's a little loose, so it just kind of takes a tap to turn it on and off. We've had whole conversations, and we'll catch it on video. That way you can kind of hear the questions. You can see no one's touching it, and then you can test asking the same questions and see when it turns on and off. All this fancy equipment that $50, $60, $100, $300, depending like what you're getting. My little flashlight has been where I've gotten some of the most answers, and like I'll just put it down somewhere and it'll start working, and people are like, how did you know? But I'll also intuitively pick a spot to put it if I feel like something's there. So it can be really simple. It can be really low tech. So it's really just what you want to do, why you want to do it, if you're just communicating, or if you're looking to find definitive quantitative or qualitative evidence to try to prove something, then you got to be like a little bit more specific about it. But I don't go into it to convince other people of anything personally. It just hasn't been my intention with it. So then they're just really tools to help facilitate that conversation or detection of energy, or you're not in tune with your own abilities, because everyone does really have them to a capacity, or if they partner with your abilities at the same time. I'll, like I said, know where to put the flashlight, or I'll have a feeling of what question to ask. So it can kind of go together.
Absolutely. You know how all the phones nowadays, they have all the apps in the world. How do you feel about a lot of those free apps that are claim to be similar to the tools that you just spoke of.
Hmm.
How do you feel about those? Have you had any experience with them?
Yeah, I've had experience with them. I don't think I've really had anything super profound with them. Like I'm not really sure. And this is just totally like personal opinion. Like I just don't know how I feel about their overall accuracy. And I think it's only because in my mind, at the bottom line is that they are programmed to a capacity. Therefore, especially like if you're looking through an investigative lens, I don't know that there's a way to guarantee that it's accurate anyway because of the programming behind it. And it's not saying it can't be accurate or that it's not, because I don't know personally the programming that went behind it, what words were chosen to be available, if there's programming or coding that might favor certain words, what is in the word bank. I've seen like the phone version of the SLS where it like allegedly kind of captures the different things, and I guess it could work. Like I said, our phones are capable of doing a lot, but I don't know. It's not my favorite. I haven't had really like great experiences personally using them or like gotten evidence where I'm like, okay, yeah, this definitely works for sure. So I just
Yeah.
don't feel particularly strongly about them myself. And that's really just where I'm at with it. If I had like even like a couple stories where I was, oh, for sure, like something really accurate like came through. Unfortunately, I just don't have anything to say like 100% that it works. So I'm kind of in that gray area of it definitely doesn't hurt to try it. But I am kind of curious if it's likely to show certain things or certain words, especially when we think about what people might be expecting to come through, like what words might have been programmed based on that. So there's just different layers to it that kind of leave me with some uncertainty versus having the more open form, like with the spirit box, where it's just cycling through and the energy is able to be manipulated. Not that our phones can't, but I don't
Mhm.
know. I almost feel like simpler tech is better and easier to manipulate by the spirits anyway, versus phones programs.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I've lived through a lot of these things as you're talking about them. I'm like, oh, yeah.
I think especially when we open up the conversation, like more people have had experiences than they think they might have. I think it's easy to discount a lot of things, especially because the energies and intuition can be so subtle. It's easy to brush off. But that's kind of the cool part with the paranormal and the spiritual, because it's not, like I said, it's not even always spooky things, but especially even on your spiritual path, or you back and you see these moments where there was maybe even like a divine intervention or a pivot or a person that encountered you at the right time, signs or synchronicities that happened during a certain point, and then realizing that there was something there throughout it, but it was just subtle enough for you to notice or get the hint or to open up another idea. Or I mean, it's even like a thought that like drops through, or yeah, it's so that's the fun part, is to realize that sometimes, especially when we think of like our spirit guides and stuff like that, or angels and those kind of ways on the other end of the paranormal that people talk about, that there is sort of this also this positive force that's kind of there giving us like little nudges along the way, and that we are more connected and receiving more guidance than we really realize, because we do all have abilities to sense that world. We just might not be consciously aware of the nudges that we're getting, but it doesn't mean that we're not getting them and still listening to them. It could just be like that idea or inspiration that drops in, or that random conversation at this really good time, or even a movie or a song that comes on and like that chunk of words suddenly just like hits in a really good way. All of that counts.
I'm recalling as you're talking, when I was a child, my cousin had been going through some difficulties in school. And he had related one morning that during the evening, when he was in bed, that he was really upset about whatever was bothering him at school. And he looked at the foot of his bed and he saw a vision of who he perceived to be Jesus.
Hmm.
And this feeling that he got with that vision was one of pure love, pure calm, and just a pure feeling of you're going to be fine.
Mm-hmm.
And he was so excited by this, and of course, so relieved that he ran, told his mom, first thing in the morning, and he still felt good. He still felt hopeful. And so you said something early on in this conversation that we see what we need to see. We
Mm-hmm.
relate to it in a way that we know, which I think is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And the second thing is, how can he see something so imbued with love and emanating love and kindness and warmth, yet people are concerned that during a paranormal investigation that the thing you're going to find is demonic? Because I know people have had to say this to you, or people who feel that way. Oh, don't mess with this, don't mess with that. You're going to stir up some sort of evil something. And then what are you going to do? Like the Ouija board, you've opened the door. Now what? Now you have to call a priest, or somebody needs to go throw holy water throughout your house. So, what is your thought? Why did he see that, but we're nervous about opening the door to demons?
I'd say the first thing that comes to mind is just fear. Some of the first question be like, "Oh, well, aren't you scared of X, Y?" And I'm like, "No." And it's not that I'll say that I never was afraid of like what I didn't know or understand, because again, I think that's normal, which is why I never disregard people's experiences with something that's dark. But I think it's correlated to what they were doing, where they were doing, and their headspace during that time. Again, it's not to say it doesn't exist or can't manifest in that way, but for me, I know that the external can't affect me because again, we're also like physical beings at the end of the day with like a conscious choice of what we want to affect by. And in some of the perspectives that Patty Hawes and I of Karma Fest, and we'll do the shamanic journeys and stuff together when we talk about it and what I've like heard before, and this is why the fear component is important, or to be mindful of it, because part of you would have to believe that it can affect you. Like there's a part of you that would have to kind of give in that fear of being attacked, it's really doubting your own power and your own connection to the divine. Where it's, if I know that I'm solid in my energy, I'm grounded, maybe I'll focus on if I'm feeling away, or I'll focus on feeling grounded and kind of feeling myself enveloped in light. And again, just being the observer versus giving into that fear. That's going to be kind of what reflects to you. It's not saying that it doesn't exist, but it's just so related to that. So I will tell people I feel like I really have anything to be afraid of. And I'll say, maybe I've gotten lucky, to not have certain experiences. But at this time, it's definitely the fear of the vulnerability, because to me, that's doubting your own personal strength or doubting your divine protection from God, source, light, spirit. Whereas, like, I know that I'm connected and protected. Therefore, these things cannot bother me. I can be aware of them, but they can't touch me. And that's really the strongest belief that you can have. And that's why, I teach, for example, the intuition. That's why knowing your own energy, it teaches you what's yours and what's not. So you don't have to take on anything that's not yours. Whereas if somebody gets an attachment, or even in addictions, and there's actually, and even mental health aspects. I think it was my roommate who was sharing, I think it's more of like a Chinese medicine perspective, where somebody is quote unquote possessed by the spirit of depression. They are possessed by the spirit of addiction. So maybe the drug, like that manifestation of that drug as like an entity. Opening your perception to what energies are, like they're not always external beings that are attacking you. They're energies or thought forms. And I think that gives you more power in it, because you realize that you can control that versus having your power taken away. When people talk about like victim mindset, that's to me what makes you more vulnerable. Part of you has to be willing to accept that reality or that attachment. There has to be something, even if it's subconscious. I'm not saying it's intentional to any capacity, but if there's something within you that resonates with that, that's going to be why it's showing up. That's why you can perceive it, is because it's something that's already really in your system or in your awareness, which is why I wouldn't recommend drinking or drugs, especially when you're doing investigations or spirit work, because it influences the the strength of your core energy. There's even other substances that you can use to open your psychic abilities, but in that ceremonial space. And there's also a different container in those spaces. There's a different ceremony setting that space protectively, ceremonially for that connection. But
That's a
that's
good point.
not what people are doing if they're
Right.
just like getting drunk and like messing around in a graveyard, or they're just opening up to whatever. So whatever is gonna come in. And that's why the energy in the container is what matters the most, and the intention, because that's part of what directs the focus in ceremony or circles or ritual, especially when you think about how things were originally done by more indigenous practices. They had intentions, they had a specific circle and offering and intention for what spirits or energies they were interacting with. But when you're just going out just open, you don't have those boundaries. And it's like with people, like when you don't have those boundaries, whoever can come in to leech off you literally or metaphorically, then you're
Yes.
vulnerable to them.
What do you recommend someone do if they are having paranormal activity and think it needs to be investigated? Maybe they're fearful, maybe just super uncomfortable. And then, secondarily, how do they get a hold of you?
If someone's feeling compelled to have something investigated, having an external person come in, whether it's myself or another investigator, it helps just to understand what energy is there, whether it's an investigator and or like an energy worker or a mixture of both or a medium, only because sometimes the energy is the house, but some of it is really reflective of like their internal world. So helping to redirecting how to organize that. And then I also like teaching people how to cleanse their space and keep their energy well, because that's what's really going to last in the long term. Them taking their power back in their own space is what's important from a place of love and empowerment versus fear. And it might be hard, obviously, when you're in it. So I understand, and I don't want to discount that reality of it, which is why there's no problem with asking someone else to come in, but eventually knowing that you are safe and you're claiming the space and you're filling it with love and happiness or joy. Like if it's your house, for example, I imagine those are things what you would prefer to be there. So whether it's cleansing it with incense or brushing out stagnant energy with a broom or trying to connect with things in those ways. When I've seen like a couple of those shows that I do like, and I think it's called Kindred Spirits, like one of the ones that I do like the way that they approach it. And a lot of it's just helping people understand who or what the spirit really is, and that takes away the fear. Because like I said, it's mostly the unknown. But if they're like, oh, this person who used to live here, or it's somebody who might have been associated with the land or the area before, now there's a place and an understanding, and then there can be kind of like a relationship for it. And also, I'll say, like, especially with some of the stories, the spirits just want to be heard or understood or acknowledged. Honestly, the activity can also drop after it's just been acknowledged and after there's an element of respect. So that's why just going into it with that heart-centered curiosity, if and when you can, over the fear, is the best way to understand that. If you have to bring someone in, that's fine as well, or have somebody read the space from afar, because you don't really have to physically be in the space to necessarily read what's going on. And remember that like you're the most powerful person in that space ultimately. So what you're willing to interact with, the boundaries you want to set, because at least in some of that show I gave as an example, rarely is it something that's actually negative, that's actually causing problems. Most of the time, it ends up very well resolved, and that understanding alone gives people peace versus just knowing that something's wrong or something's different or something's going on and being afraid of if it's going to do something, especially when there's kids involved, because you just don't understand. And a lot of it, like modern society, we just don't have that connection with spirit built into our culture as people did in more indigenous cultures, or just, I mean, other ones that just have that more openness to the fact that everything is sort of alive, everything has an energy. So when you're not in that realm of awareness, it's obviously really unsettling, but it just builds your relationship with understanding. So that's what I would say is whatever helps you build your understanding of what's going on and figuring out ways that make you feel good to invite and cleanse and empower your space is what's most important. Whatever practice that is for you, even if it's bringing in a priest or someone just to do a house blessing or a clearing. Again, doing what speaks to you is ultimately what matters most. If you were curious about connecting with me specifically, everything, my contact, whether it's booking or my email through mpexpressions.com. That's where you can also find me if you have specific questions or maybe want a referral or a curiosity. That's where you can find me.
She's worth it.
I also heard that you do some shamanic work. Is that right?
Hmm.
We'll have to have you back and talk all about that because I have a whole list of questions for that one.
All
Whenever you have time, if you're up for it.
right, actually, yeah, I have to head out of here to do a shamanic journey with Patty Halls after this of Karma Fest. If you want to ask questions, I can try to answer whatever I can.
Megan is the best. She attuned me to Akatawa energy healing, and she did not walk away from me after a shamanic journey in which she and Patty Halls had facilitated. When I approached her and said, "This may sound crazy," and she put her hand on my arm and said, "It's not going to sound crazy, just tell me." And then I told her about these visions of these animals that come through my walls, and she and I have been together ever since. She has been the best thing ever to happen to me along my spiritual journey. And because you are so instrumental in my life, I am hoping that you can leave our listeners with an invocation or affirmation about spirit connection, finding their life purpose, or paranormal, whatever you think
Hmm.
they may need to hear since you're super intuitive.
I think the best practice to have, and that's what I start, I think pretty much everybody with when I do the mentorship or intuitive teaching, is something that connects you to yourself every day, whether it's a actual like full meditation practice or not. I think it can be as simple as taking a moment to really ground above and below and to know centered and protected by divine light. I am connected above and below. I am centered and protected by divine light is what comes to me the most. And then I think as you continue to connect with that, with your soul, with your center, the other things just start to come together and clear up.
Thank you, my friend.
So beautiful.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Megan, for joining us and letting us pick your brain on all of these awesome things. And I wish you a wonderful commute to your journey, which is interesting, and a good journey in both ways.
Thank you for joining the Mystical Mermaid Lounge podcast. Constructive and positive feedback are always welcome. Drop us some fan mail at mysticalmermaidlounge@buzzsprout.com or email us directly at mysticalmermaidlounge@yahoo.com. Finally, we do not accept sponsorships or ads so that we may bring a less distracting message to our listeners. So, if you are just as passionate as we are about educating and supporting spiritual seekers, then please brew some tea or Joe and pour us a cup at buymeacoffee.com/Mystical Mermaid Lounge. Thanks again and catch us at the next high tide. Bye-bye.